I'm so thankful both of you are on this session because I think when I look around in the mental health space, I'm looking at like who's talking about how we should be doing it. So maybe we can kick off this session with actually, how would you both describe yourself in relationship to the work that you do in the mental health space?
Ivan, you want to go first?
I got arrowed like that. Yeah, I mean that's a really tough question to answer. I wanted to just throw in my title, like I'm a clinical psychologist or whatnot. But I think at some point in time, these titles become very technical. And I'm also quite mindful that potentially we might push people away because of the title. Again, it goes back to the concept of stigma and everything like that. So I'm gonna use what my supervisors has always been sharing with me ever since I was still in training, that we are just humans, we are not technicians. We are not there to solve anyone's problem. We are just humans trying to connect with one another. So to answer the question, I am just a human with some scientific knowledge in mental health field, but nonetheless, I am still a learner to clients and patients like.
Can I steal your title? So I'm also a human.
Well, I'm loving this like humanizing of ourselves in this space. But if someone was from the outside looking in and trying to figure out, why should I trust Sherman and why should I trust Ivan's opinion about mental health or mental well-being, then what would be a professional-ish title that you would be proud to own? You'd be okay to own it. Like you'd stand by it.
I'm from a social enterprise called Happiness Initiative, right? And we do a lot of very research-based work, in the communities, in schools, in organizations, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically what I do. But if you don't ask me personally, I'm not a fan of big titles also. But I guess it's somewhat more of like a community person. Yeah, because I love organizing community events, getting people together, and just really building that sense of community and belonging with people. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is you're a community organizer and you work with researchers and you also work with mental health professionals to support like lots of people in the community.
For us, we do a lot more of upstream preventive interventions, not so much of clinical work. So Ivan probably takes care of that part, where you deal with more clinical interventions and deal with clinical conditions. But for us, we don't do that. So a lot of times it's more of how do we help people build strong enough resilience such that they don't get depression and a lot of these mental health conditions.
Okay, got it. Ivan, how about you?
If that's the case, I would just use my own title, clinical psychologist, because ultimately it is. As much as I was talking about the potential barriers and whatnot, but I think it's important for people to know that they are professionals. Certain titles are there for a purpose, like for psychologists or clinical psychologists specifically. We work predominantly with clinical population. So obviously, populations or individuals with potential mental health concerns. So I would say that particular title would be helpful, at least for whoever wants to seek help. They know who are the people that they can go to. The concept, the information I'm about to share will be more reliable, at least as compared to those who may or may not have this particular title. Again, it's not just exclusively for clinical psychologists.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that these titles are there for a reason.
I'm picking out on the two things that you're saying about how the title can sometimes push people away, and yet the title can also give people a sense of what would be reliable or more reliable information coming from a certain person. So I guess in this whole episode, I want to center it on the listener out there who might be thinking, I would like to have some help. I would like to seek help for things that I'm going through, which may be a bit complicated. I'm not even sure if it's a mental health thing or not, but it seems so difficult, even overwhelming to where do I even start? Who do I go to for help? Because there's psychologists, psychiatrists, counselor, trauma-informed therapists, regular therapist. And so maybe I'll lean first on Ivan. Like, could you help us unpack, like, actually, who should you go to for what? What's the difference between a clinical psychologist and therapist and a trauma-informed, etc., etc.?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So generically, if we were to view it in terms of severity, so you usually would start with counselor. Counselor generally would be working predominantly on general life advisors, relational issues, so on and so forth. That as we progress in terms of severity, then psychologists will come in after that to do assessment, to provide a diagnostical assessment, test, so that we understand that the difficulties a little bit better. And then from there, if at any point we were to elevate the severity scale again, that's where the psychiatrist comes in, right? So, but of course, the training modality or the training pathways are also very different. For psychiatrists, they are actually medical doctors, so they have to go through medical degree first, and then they go through a specialization or their masters to be a psychiatrist. So they are medical doctors, who they actually have the power to prescribe medication. A psychologist and counselors can't do that. Even therapists can't prescribe any form of medicine. In psychology, is a very big field as it is. We have multiple. It's an umbrella term whereby it encompasses different forms. So we have clinical psychologists like myself, we have education psychologists, child psychologists, so on and so forth. Again, they all assist clients from different populations, if I were to put it that way. And then to answer your question about therapists, if you were to view it that way, as the name suggests, they have a special modality that they have a certain expertise in. So if let's say you're talking about trauma-informed therapists, then they supposedly should be involved in the necessary educational pathway or necessary training to be a trauma-informed therapist. So if I were to put it in terms of severity, generally, as per mentioned, so your counselor, psychologist, and psychiatrist. If you're talking about modality, all of us work in a different way as well. For counselors and psychologists, we may or may not have a specialized technique or modality. We may have a general understanding of different modalities, but we may or may not be a specialized in one area. I understand it's very confusing, and I think that's also the difficulties that a lot of us are having, not just among the general population or general public, but also within the clinicians ourselves too, because we generally work within the same field. So our roles overlap, our roles clash with one another, and I think because of that, it can eventually lead to this confusion kind of difficulty. So
I'm about to go over to Sherman in a while, but I wanted to press in on the phrase trauma-informed therapist or trauma-informed counselor in particular. What should trauma-informed mean? Because trauma-informed therapist cannot be, I went through trauma myself, or I watched a couple of trauma-informed YouTube videos. So what should trauma-informed mean to you?
Generally, trauma, if we were to look into from a clinical definition by itself, it should be an experience whereby you witness life and death situation. So that's how trauma is originally being defined as clinically. But of course, subsequently, it may or may not have to be you experience it. It could also be you witness it. So vicariously, you live someone's trauma. As the field progress, this term trauma has been used relatively loosely. So basically, as of now, you will hear many people will use this term to describe whatever they are, any inconvenience that they are going through in life. Again, I'm not downplaying the significance or the severity of what they're going through, but I think at some point in time, a certain understanding of the word itself, like the word trauma, we should be more mindful and careful in terms of that. To answer your question about trauma-informed, we should understand from from people's point of view, whoever they are seeking help, that they potentially are going through certain difficulties or inconveniences in their life. And with that said, we have to be very mindful in how we speak and relate to them. So that's the concept of trauma-informed, whereby with the understanding that this person might be going through or had gone through certain difficulties, with that in mind, the way I speak, the way I relate, the way I communicate with this person, I have to be more mindful to not downplay, to not minimize or even undermine their difficulties. So that should be the original concept of how trauma-informed modality is supposed to be.
Thank you. Sherman, you deal with like lots of communities. Trauma has come up probably like in conversations and all that. So I'm wondering for you, when you organize your communities, how would you help someone understand the difference between mental health and mental well-being? And how do you start to discern like maybe you might need some other forms of support that our community can't really provide for you?
Yeah. So mental health and mental well-being, there's a slight distinction in terms of what it actually means, right? So mental health tends to look a lot more about illnesses, right? Dealing with like things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, trauma, and stuff like that, right? And usually when it comes to mental health, we don't and happiness, we don't usually manage those. So usually if someone comes in and tells us that, oh, I'm feeling depressed, I got diagnosed, I need help, usually we will refer them to a trained clinician, right? Because usually when it comes to mental health illnesses, or in this case, we use the term mental health, right? You would probably need someone that is better equipped, that understands, what are the ways that you could help to manage this condition to help the person better. Right? Mental well-being is a little bit different. It's a lot more about how do we live a meaningful life, how do we manage the stress and cope with the stress that we face in our day-to-day lives, right? It's a lot about how to build a better version of yourself, right? In the sense. So an easy way sometimes I could distinct this, because mental health and illnesses tend to deal with issues of the past, right? Usually something's happened in the past and then you're trying to sort of make sense of it, right? And then that's where you usually go to a clinician, either a counselor, a therapist, to help you, right? But well-being, it tends to focus a lot more on the future, building a better version of yourself. Yeah.
If I had to situate myself in this space of like mental well-being, I definitely like lean more on I support well-being. I don't even like say I support people's mental well-being, but I understand like some of the trainings that I do, people can feel supported in that. For you, what would be the distinctions you would use between like a life coach, a peer support group, a training program, a wellness coach? Because there's lots of like titles in our field of work as well. Yeah.
So it's confusing, and sometimes it's a bit it's difficult to define because people use the terms very loosely, right? Someone could just run a program and just call themselves a life coach, right? But someone could do counseling and call them peer support. Like the terms sometimes are loosely used, right? But if you want what is somehow some kind of a definition, life coach tends to focus a lot on helping you achieve certain goals in life. So, for example, your career goals, personal goals, and they basically they'll guide you through and to see how can we achieve those goals, right? So that's a target that you try to hit, right? And life coach actually is there are certain certification programs that you have to go through. There are bodies that actually certify coaches, right? So it's not those kind of like people anyhow, you just go to a friend and anyhow give you life advice. Those are technically not life coaches, right? So there are specific skill sets that coaches should have, right? In terms of if they call themselves a life coach, right? Peer support is a bit more. If you look at the tiering, peer support is the more lowest hanging fruit one, where it's basically just about being there for someone, knowing how to listen to them, right? And it's not about learning how to tackle their problems, right? And basically someone who is a peer supporter would just be given the skills of how do I listen and empathize with someone else, right?
Even the way you're describing peer support, I'm hearing that, and I definitely see that's how some people describe it. I've also seen debate among like clinicians about how, oh man, the peer support term has been co-opted, right? It's not supposed to mean that. Ivan, could you like present like that perspective? Because I'm not familiar with how like a clinician would describe peer support.
I do agree with Sherman, because nowadays we don't really follow the traditional usage of words anymore. And of course, to us, it means one thing, to other people, it means another thing as well. So peer support, I do agree what Sherman mentioned about they are guided with skill set, to basically connect to another person. So active listening skill set, the ability to be more empathetic, and it may or may not be people with mental health conditions. So some peer support, they are actually they have lived experience of mental health conditions themselves. So they might potentially be the people that they will volunteer and work to be one of the peer support. So they'll be there to kind of provide. Again, is I think Sherman phrased it perfectly. It's not a way to solve someone else's problem. So even if I have the same diagnosis as, let's say, the both of you, I still cannot say that I understand you entirely. But I do have the lived experience. I have people who have gone through similar difficulties. I can be there to sit there and listen to you, to be there for you. And if at any point your situation were to escalate into a lot more severe condition, then at least I will be there to guide you on who should I refer you to, whether it's a professional, whether it's to whoever there is. So these are generally peer support would be like if you were to view it like a platform for someone to feel heard, for someone to feel connected, to feel related to. And then they also have the right skill set to steer these individuals who are seeking help to the right platform if it's needed.
Yeah. I think for the listener out there who is wondering why are they spending so much time like talking about these definitions and all that, one of the things I'm hoping that you'll hear as a listener is how debatable some of these titles have become. And as a seeker of help, sometimes you're going in with a lot of trust that the person who calls themselves a certain title has done the requisite work that is deserving of that title. So even as Sherman was sharing about how, okay, there are life coaches who go through the certification process. I can tell you, like, as a trained coach, one of the big, I suppose, like tensions in the coaching world right now is how people don't even go through a certification process and they call themselves a coach, or they go through a very dodgy coaching program. It's like, okay, I have 2 days, I learned some skills, now I can call myself a life coach. So even in the coaching profession, it's like there's a bit of worry that there are, let's just use a strong word, there's charlatans who call themselves a coach, right? And in my coaching training, what I was very struck by is the trainer tells us, okay, when someone is obviously going through a clinical issue, you as a coach ethically have to let them know, I as a coach cannot support you in that. I can support you in A and B and C, but for this part, you really need to get other help. But what struck me is no one is policing us on that. That means it's like the trainer told us, we hand on heart will go and promise to do it. But actually, no one is really policing you. So technically, you can have a coach who decides it's a good idea to call myself a trauma-informed coach and pretend that I'm an expert on trauma, right? So it's sort of like seek carefully. I think that in general, that's what this whole like session is going to be about. So I'm going to segue to, all right, so let's say the listener's like, okay, fine. I've heard you about your therapist and your psychologist and all that, but I just need some help, man, right? So if someone has a struggle and they're not even sure if it's a mental health struggle, but they're definitely under some kind of crunch, they just know they need help. What would both of you suggest as the way this person should begin their seeking of help? Where should they even start? And how will they know where to start?
If let's say we were to see in a very great way, the perfect view, perfect world, as per se, I would definitely say that, go and speak to a professional, go and speak to a counselors and a psychologist. That would be perfect. But I understand that in real life, it doesn't really work that way. It's very rare. And we also have to factor in the concept of stigma as well. It's very rare that I would just wake up one day, I don't feel good, and I think immediately of speaking to a psychologist. Very rare that happens. Like even with the clients I've spoken to all this while, it never happened like that. They don't wake up one fine day and speak to Ivan. It doesn't work that way. Most of the time they're being forced to see me. So that's just how it works, you see. But I would definitely say that the understanding the people around you. So that means even though you may or may not have mental health conditions or mental health or mental illness, if I were to use that term, it's important to know that who are the people around you. Are there any people and any individuals that you may trust? For instance, it could potentially be your parents, potentially be your spouse, or even friends. So the idea is that rather than looking at who should we go to, I think the key point that we should boil back down would be how comfortable are we to open up this conversation? Are we okay to speak to someone? Because some of us are okay with it, but not all of us are. So understanding whether or not we are comfortable, I think that's the key thing. Then subsequently, then we can look into which platform we should guide them to, whether is it their friends, the people they're close to, or even professional viewpoints.
Yeah, I echo that. I think at the end of the day, it's just start by reaching out to someone, and it has to be someone you trust and someone you feel comfortable sharing what you want to share with the person, right? And nowadays there are so many platforms that you could get help, right? And sometimes the platforms may not even be a person; it could be like a forum or something. Like I know, like the government runs like Mindline, which is an online forum to help people go through difficult situations in their lives, right? So there are many different places to seek help. But I think the key thing is always talk to someone. And I think as you talk to someone, you realize that, hey, this person is not giving me what I need. Then maybe then you should consider, maybe let's talk to someone else, right? And to see whether that makes you feel better or not.
How would you help either a seeker themselves or someone who is like a friend or let's say a spouse to a seeker, right? How can you help them understand at what point is it, I think you should go for, let's say, professional help as opposed to community help, right? I hear you on the sometimes it's easier for people to seek community help, but how would we know the boundary between like, I really think we need to get you some like clinical help?
If I am to use clinical definition as per se, we have to look at what's the impact. So how has it impact your life? Whether is it your occupational life, that means your work. How has it impact your social life? How has it impact your academic life as well? Or even day-to-day activities. So if let's say some of my difficulties are, they are there. I do have some difficulties, but it's not at the point whereby it impacts my performance in different areas. I would say that you can definitely talk to your friends. You can definitely talk to people around you as well, and perhaps sometimes seeking different opinions. It will just help you with whether is it to try something different or even have a different mindset of viewing the whole situation. But if let's say we are starting to see that it impacts your day-to-day lifestyle, for instance, it impacts your sleeping pattern. You can't sleep for the longest time, or it impacts your appetite, for instance, that because of certain difficulties, you just couldn't eat, or sometimes because of certain difficulties, you eat a lot more than usual. So if you start to see these changes, and because of these changes, it exacerbates more difficulties, then I would say that, yes, let's seek out for professional help. It doesn't have to be solving your problems. It's almost like provide another way that perhaps we need to rule out that may or may not be a mental health condition as per se, but at least we know that it's beyond what we can do by ourselves and we need to reach out to another person. So I will view it from the standpoint of impact, actually.
Yeah, Sherman, what's your take, especially as you support your community, and I understand that you run like these well-being circles. Like, what do you tell the facilitators of the well-being circles to look out for? Like the boundary between like, it's lovely that you're getting help here. I think you can also complement it with like help from a professional.
Yeah. So that this is also sometimes quite a gray area, because how much do you think you could support this person? But I think Ivan also sort of said it quite well, right? It could be things like changes in behavior, right? They suddenly lose interest in their work, they quit their job, social isolation, withdrawal symptoms, and everything. And of course, there are the very obvious things like suicide ideation and stuff like that, right? That definitely is a huge red flag that we usually will try to refer them to a trained professional, Yeah, so what we do is we try to train our leaders on how to sort of pick out some of these red flags, right? And every time in the program, if you realize that this person exhibited certain behaviors that are very worrying, right? And then they will then flag it out to our team, who will then assess whether, hey, let's talk to this person and help them to seek help, right? Seek professional help. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm picking out on the term that you use, like looking out for these red flags. So, like I suppose one of the things we don't want to do through this episode is to make it seem like, okay, it's a clinicians versus community support kind of thing, because what we really need is allies from both sides of the fence to present, I suppose, a village or an ecosystem of care of anyone who needs support. But there are also dodgy or unethical practitioners out there who we really should watch out for. So, what for you would be like big red flags that are like you really shouldn't trust either this clinician, or you shouldn't trust this community facilitator or coach or whatever they want to call themselves? This is like get out right now. Yeah. What for you would be your big red flags?
I would think that the biggest and most common kind of red flag is that when the organization or the individual is more interested in making your money than to help you, right? And usually there are a lot of ways that can happen. Sometimes it's the case that they will charge you exorbitant fees, right? Which is not necessarily always the only indicator, because clinical psychologists, as Ivan might probably know, can be quite expensive, right? So it's the price point itself is not the thing, but it's more of a case that, are they, if a clinical psychologist could be too expensive, I think they would tend to be very upfront with their fees. They will tell you that, oh, this is the number of hours, this is the rate per hour that I charge. This is what the number of sessions you probably need to go through with me. And, this is the final bill. Do you think it's something that you could afford? Yep. Right? If not, I can recommend you to some of these other counselors or anything that could be cheaper and within my budget, right? I've heard of organizations where what they do is that they make people pay for certain programs or sessions, and then after when it ends, they tell them that, oh, I think that it's not enough. You need to do this, and this is a fee that you must pay, and stuff like that, right? So I think the biggest red flag really is this: you see the way how transparent are they in the way they charge you and give you the cost of the program? Because I feel that in the mental health space, most of the times people don't do it for fun. Usually, there's some financial gain that they're looking out for. Right. And that's often the common bad actors that you see within the industry.
I think that's absolutely right. Whereby, fees is one thing for sure. I think that's definitely something that a lot of the organization are working on in order to regulate. There will be a certain price range to it. Again, it depending on the number of hours, depending on the number of years of experience you are at. So that potentially would be one of the factors. The other thing that I also want to talk about would be the necessity of doing a certain intervention, for instance. So again, ultimately, it's important for us to look from clinician standpoint, yes, when client comes in, then as we are providing certain form of recommendations, it has to have a certain justifications behind it. Why am I proposing this particular intervention, for instance? Why do you have to go through this assessment? If your clinicians, anyone at all, is unable to provide a sound justification as to why they would recommend a certain assessment tool or even how many number of package, for instance, I would say there will be a big red flag there. Is either this person, this particular clinician, is not familiar with the research and the literature out there as to why they would recommend these few packages or this intervention plan. Second thing would be they potentially might be just throwing it out so that they can rack more moolah, if I were to use that term.
Yeah.
So that would be one way to see the potentially could be the huge red flag relating to how transparent they are. Actually, I think the Sherman highlighted perfectly in terms of how they will help a client.
I've even heard of organizations that an organization that they what they do is that they tell their clients that say that, oh, you need to pay this amount of money because it's a commitment, right? So if you don't pay, you're not serious about this or taking care of your mental health and everything. Right? So I kind of feel that services need to be paid for, but I think it shouldn't be conflating. The paying for it shouldn't be the part of the treatment. Paying for
Yeah.
it, you're just paying for the service that is being offered. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I can bring to the table is, so I mentioned that there's coaching that I do, and I see like unethical coaching practices where the coaching is one-on-one and it starts to borderline into therapeutic kind of language, like, oh, let's do inner child work right now in this session, let's unpack your trauma. And I'm like, coaches are not supposed to do that. Like, why would you advertise yourself doing that? But I think another thing that people may not be aware of is there's also training programs or coaching programs or leadership programs or self-awareness programs or religious programs, whatever they want to call it, but it's a program. And sometimes it's a costly program, and it actually does borderline therapeutic work that people didn't ask for. That means they didn't know that that's what they're signing up for, but that's what gets opened up, right? And I'm wondering what would both of your takes be on that? Like, have you seen it happen? And like, what would be your own like red flags around programs like that?
I mean, I definitely have seen it happen. But if it's a clinical thing, right? Like if someone is depressed, right? I think it's very clear cut that part definitely should be regulated. You need trained professionals to work with this person.
Yeah.
Right. But if you talk about programs, I have a bit of a mixed feelings because human beings, we are very complex creatures, right? And sometimes what we need varies from person to person, right? And we cannot just say that, okay, this is the license program and everyone, if you want to improve your well-being, you only can go through these few programs, right? Because sometimes what they need may be something completely different that some random person decides to organize and like do a sewing class, for example. And maybe I love sewing, therefore that kind of gives me what I need, to go through that difficult time in life. Yeah, so I have a bit of a mixed feelings about how we should tackle that, because on one hand I do feel that some of these bad actors needs to be exposed and to tell people that actually you're not doing any good to the people, right? But on the other hand, I also feel that how do you even regulate a space like that where there's just so many different ways that you could help a person, right?
Actually, that's a very real difficulties that a lot of us, especially clinicians, are facing as well. It's a concept of mental health or even mental well-being, if I were to use the word, right? Because the concept itself is so broad. Even researchers ourselves, when we look into the concept of mental health, you will, I mean, it's not uncommon. You will find that every researcher have a different viewpoint. Some look from a standpoint of resilience. Some look from the concept of pathological viewpoint. That means with a diagnosis or not. Then there's another branch whereby they look into how you build meaning in your life. But they are all still within the umbrella of mental health. So because the concept itself is so broad, I think that's exactly the difficulties that we are seeing as well. I do share Sherman's sentiment actually, whereby how do we regulate like any causes like that, right? But I think it boils back down to the concept of how responsible we are as, I mean, I'm talking about from the standpoint of clinician, how ethical and responsible we are. And especially when it comes to an area that we are not comfortable or even we are not prepped in assisting. So for instance, if let's say I am not trained in certain modality and this client comes in with these difficulties and I think this particular modality can be very helpful and I'm not trained in that, I should by any means, especially within my ethical practice, to refer this client out. So basically holding a client is not a go-to method. But again, there's a fine balance between, especially for organizations that have the concept of business making policy, for instance. Then it's very hard to balance it because if I refer out, that will mean that I'm sending my client out. I'm sending the money out, basically.
Yeah.
But at some point, how do I balance it again? So it's very hard to distinguish that. It's very hard to balance it. It's really boils back down to how responsible that particular organization or even a clinician is actually upholding this ethical practice, basically.
Yeah. So what I'm definitely hearing from both of you is like there's sort of like three big themes that we can kind of look out for. Like one is like, what is the relationship of this practitioner with money? Is it like borderline a bit dodgy, like over aggressive money making tactics? There's also like how clear is this person about the ethics and the boundaries of what they should do, should not do? Are they able to articulate that clearly to you? And I think like the other and maybe least understood thing that you need to watch out for is the element of power and control, because sometimes people don't do it for the money, they don't do it for the because I'm just a dodgy, unethical person. Sometimes it's a weird power trip. Like I like the idea of having power over you and telling you what to do and telling you what's wrong with you. And I mentioned that because I think there isn't a very strong shared understanding of what's okay and not okay in this field. I'm struck that in the US, there is an organization called Seek Safely. It's a nonprofit that came out from uh, a, 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 a family member who saw, I mean, a woman saw her own sister pass away in a very dodgy, unethical leadership program. And as a result, started this like Seek Safely NGO to sort of list out what are big red flags that a help seeker should look out for. I wanted to go through the list and get a sense of which ones are like standing out for you as like, yeah, that's definitely like a big no-go, and why does it stick out so much for you? Okay, so here's like some of the choice notes from the list on Seek Safely. Before the event starts, you are asked to sign a waiver without time to review the contents, and you are discouraged from asking questions. You're told to just trust the process. During the event, it's a highly packed schedule with very little time to process the information. There may be little breaks that don't allow you adequate time to eat or use the restroom or hydrate. The doors may be locked or you're discouraged from leaving. The atmosphere in the event room, there might be the presence of very loud music at the introduction and during breaks, and volunteers stand around to pump up the energy and dance and jump around. The speaker's behavior, they tend to rely heavily on testimonials from the outside, especially big names or famous names to establish their credibility. The success of the speaker is being hyped, especially by the hype men volunteers on the side, encouraging you to emulate their belief. There may be little references to distinctions between opinion, speculation, or scientific research. Sales tactics are always present. There's constant reminders about additional products that can be purchased or must be purchased. Lots of emphasis on scarcity. Things are in limited numbers, or if you buy now, it's heavily discounted. No refund policy. And in general, a strong combination of sensory deprivation tactics, which is all the loud music and the jumping around volunteers, and like very like a hyped up speaker, and highly charged emotional experiences that encourage a breakdown of a person so that there's a lot of vulnerability, suggestibility, and compliance. And a lot of oversharing can take place in the room. So I'm going to stop there. It's not the full list, but that's already a lot of wows. Which ones are like sticking out for you? Like, oh, yep, I've heard that before, or I've seen that before in Singapore, because some people might not believe this actually happens here.
I sincerely hope that that is not what we are seeing in clinical setting. Signing consent form is a key thing that should be done at the very beginning of any session, but it's not to get them to sign a waiver to not ask questions. In fact, we encourage questions as well. That should be the ethical practice, whereby we get them to sign a consent form because of confidentiality purposes. So they have to sign a consent form, of course, depending on their age as well. But the idea is that as they are signing, we will also check with them. We should be checking with them if they understand what they are signing. Because there's usually a clause whereby, especially if we're talking about confidentiality, at any point you will feel there is a potential threat to one's life or other people's life as well, then we have to break confidentiality. That should definitely be the go-to standard as well. But I think what I do resonate when I was hearing the list actually is the speaker's behavior, especially when it comes to little to no references to research. And I think that is very rampant, unfortunately. So if you were to hear any clinician say things along the stretch like, well, I've been practicing this for the past 10, 20 years, and that is a method that I would usually go for, and you should trust me on that. I mean, okay, you can, of course, because again, I'm not downplaying the fact whereby this 10 to 20 years experience can potentially be helpful. But I also like to think from a research standpoint whereby is it a luck-based thing? Because maybe it's your own, I don't know what kind of skill set, what kind of soft skills you have, 10 to 20 years, only you are able to replicate that and other clinicians can't do that. Is it because you are almighty? That's why people should go to you. Or can we replicate this with a scientific method? So I would personally, I'm more scientific in that sense. I would prefer that if you have any success in any form of modalities, any things that you're doing in the session, we should find ways to generalize it to different people, to different groups as well. Or even for this skill set to be taught to the future generation, future clinicians, for instance. The other thing I also do think is quite rampant is the concept of telling you that, hey, you should just trust me on that. And then they guarantee your progress. Ultimately, mental health stems from the concept of physical health. So a lot of our the way we view it will still be very pathological because that's how medical doctors are trained, right? So even then, they don't really say that within these 1 to 2 sessions that you completely be healed. There's no certainty to it, but they will tell you like there's a certain percentage to it, like how much you can progress if you were to try this out, 70 to 80% or whatnot like that. But again, all of those should be backed up with scientific facts. It's not based on what I think, what I feel. So there are potential clinicians out there who tell clients like, or just attend this session for 6 sessions, you will be perfect. After that, you'll be all good after that. I mean, if everything goes well, good, but it's very hard to guarantee that because there are so many factors impacting our life. And of course, with that said, impacting our well-being as well. We cannot guarantee anything in a session. We can tell them the progress, the trajectory, but there are other factors that clients have to know to make informed decision. But I think the moment when you hear clinicians say more than what they're supposed to in a session, and use themselves as a guideline, like, oh, I've gone through this and you should trust me on that, I would say that would be a strong no-no.
What I'm definitely hearing is like a big red flag there is like if there's any grandiose, over-promising, super chop guarantee, if it's a bit like too good to be true, it's like a bit dodgy. Like remember, like you don't want to be like a victim of someone just trying to sell you a product and make money off you, right? Sherman, like what stood out for you from that list?
Actually, honestly, there wasn't really one that really stood out and said, oh, if this happens, it's really a big red flag, right? But I think it's really a little bit of a combination of different things, right? Because each of the things in its own may not necessarily always be a negative thing, right? So for example, like the speakers rely heavily on testimonials. Even trained coaches and everything always use testimonials, right? Because it's just the way they need to sort of get new leads on to get clients and everything, right? But if it's someone that rely heavily on testimonials and they push a lot of products to the thing, then maybe that's a little bit more of a red flag. As you were reading the thing, I think that what stood out was that this wasn't really so much of a red flag in terms of like a clinical setting. Is more like, I think they seem to be looking a lot more as those kind of life coach, kind of like Tony Robbins kind of thing, where they have a stage and they're rah-rah and they're like, oh, we're going to change your life and stuff like that. And then they do all the firewalking things and whatnot, right? So I think it's a lot more about educating the public about the self-help, like, like if I want to just be a better version of myself, what are the things that I need to take note of? Yeah, so I would say my answer is really that it's really a combination of different things. And at the heart of it all is that, do you feel uncomfortable in that situation that you don't have time to process the thing? And like what Ivan said, I think one of the key things is that if they guarantee you something, I think that's problematic.
Yeah.
Because I think no one can ever guarantee you that you will be better. They can solve all your problems, right? Because only you can do that, right, for yourself.
Yeah, I think I want to validate any listener out there who's like, well, if I'm uncomfortable, should I walk away? Maybe they know better. I think generally a healthy practitioner, whether they're a clinician or a coach or whatever you want to call it, a trustworthy person will say, if you're uncomfortable, like then it's okay, like let's not work on this anymore. You can actually seek help from someone else. It's okay because they are wanting the best for you. rather than like wanting the best for them. And I think that's a big red flag when they are more interested in like getting you to you should trust me, or like they're getting a bit too defensive when you ask them questions about is this an okay thing to do. Yeah, a healthy practitioner would totally support you in look for help from someone else if like I'm not working out for you. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to like turn our attention to help seekers in Singapore. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people in the field are very like feeling testy about is like, do people actually understand that there's not much regulation in the field? Right? Because that's a general underlying theme that we're talking about here. But Ivan, could you share about the issue of like regulation, non-regulation of clinicians?
That has been something that I think a lot of us, including myself, has been really trying to push, and we speak a lot about that as well in different platforms. But what makes it so difficult to regulate any form of clinical practice, especially when it comes to mental health? But it's just because our roles are so diverse, but yet our roles overlap one another. So it's very hard to highlight the point like who is doing what. So that's one. Second thing is the concept of mental health, the concept of mental well-being. Again, because it's so broad, who can do what? Then it's very hard to answer the question as well. I mean, I can tell you from the standpoint of severity, like I mentioned at the very beginning, like clinician different roles, right? But again, not every clinician share the idea. Some potentially say riding on a way whereby no, I mean, I've took up certain certification, then I should be called another name right now. So even within the field itself, there are conflict of ideas rather. Of course, I'm not saying that just because there are some conflicts and that it always have to be bad. It's not necessarily the case. And I think with conflicts, it brings a certain conversation alive. What's the goal that we should all work towards? Again, regulation can be seen both ways. Of course, I have come across clinicians where they're really against the concept of regulation, because the idea of regulating basically means that I need to follow a certain rules, right? Again, it's not from a standpoint whereby they're not ethical, not so much. They are worried potentially what they are doing will be tied to like a book. They become a technician that I can only practice this. Like, this is what I can say. Some clinicians don't like the idea. Some clinicians will go for the idea as well, because it is exactly with this framework, with this guideline, I can then secure somewhat the replicability of the result. So again, because it's such a broad concept, so it's very hard to regulate it, and because of that, we are hearing a lot of different viewpoints here and there, and because we are so not united in this area, it is hard to regulate something because of lack of unity.
Yeah, we're going to sort of bring this conversation to a close, but I think what's standing out throughout this entire episode is it is important to have certain standards that we're looking out for, but regulation is hard, almost impossible. We can't like turn to the government and say like, hey, you solve this problem. It sounds like it's a whole of society. The seeker needs to look out for each other. The practitioners need to look out for each other. So I'm going to read a list again from that Seek Safely website about what practitioners should be committed to. And Sherman, I wanted to get your take on like if you would add any more to this like list of green flags, right? So for Seek Safely, the 6 things that they ask practitioners to commit to and demonstrate to a seeker is number 1, they should be truthful. That means consumers or seekers should receive accurate information about the author or the leader or the practitioner. Your professional credentials and experiences should be true. Okay. Number 2, is the practitioner accurate? Right? That means they know how to accurately tell you what is their personal opinion and belief and speculation versus what is factually true. Number 3, is the practitioner protective? That means they'll protect the emotional safety of seekers by keeping confidentiality of what you shared and also implementing appropriate boundaries. And number 4, they should have integrity, which means this practitioner will provide personal witness of their work by living out what they teach or living out what they train. Number 5, they are respectful. So they will allow a seeker or a participant to freely express opinions without needing to ridicule them or shame them or humiliate them or make them sound like, oh, you're the stupid one, I'm the smart one. And the sixth is that the practitioner is safe. That means they will lay out for you what is their risk management plan, or they will tell you why they want to minimize this risk for you, and they will explain any potential risk, and you'll happily take whatever question you have about, like, is this an okay or not okay thing. Yeah, so Sherman, I wanted your take. Like, would you add any other extra green flags to that? Like, yeah, please look out for this.
As you're saying, I think the thing that came to my mind is the doctors, they do this oath. What is it? I forgot there's an oath, but essentially the key idea is that do no harm.
Yes.
Right. And I say this because I'm in the space of my work doing all these community things. I realized that there are a lot of things that people do that are very pseudoscience, right? They are not really scientifically validated, but yet they give people a certain peace of mind, right? The biggest example I could think of is astrology. Right, so astrology is just something that has totally no basis in research or science, or it's not validated at all, right? Because it's just star signs and stuff like that, right? But so many people believe in it. And as I talk to people, it gives them a sense of control, a sense of safety in their lives, right? Which I kind of think that, maybe there's nothing wrong with that, right? Even though that there is no scientific basis behind it, because while it doesn't harm them, right? It doesn't make them like go on a downward spiral. It doesn't make them worse off, right? So I feel that the key idea here is really that as a practitioner, the key idea is that it's really your objective is that you want the other person to be a better version of themselves, and it's not, and you cannot harm them, right? But from a user's point of view, I think another key thing that could be that you should look out for is really word of mouth, right? So really ask people that have gone through the program how they feel about it, right? And not people that the organization recommends, oh, you should talk to this person, that person. I think if you could randomly ask around and say that, oh, have you heard of this organization? You can kind of know whether this organization is sort of a legit one, or is something that you should be wary of, right? Because especially in the mental health space, I can tell you that there are certain organizations that in the industry, everybody knows that, hey, you should stay away from these guys.
Yeah.
Right, but there's sometimes which goes back maybe to the theme of regulation. Sometimes we can't do much because what they're doing is not exactly illegal, right? And there's no way we could prove that they're doing anything wrong, because in a sense it's a willing buyer, willing seller, right? So, but then if you ask people within the space, they'll tell you that, please stay away from this organization. I don't think that they have your best interest at heart. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm about to get Ivan to list his green flags, but just as a response to Sherman, I think one of the most awful things we have to sit with in this space is to realize that a lot of things that are done that are harmful, that are not okay, are within the realms of the law. Manipulation, unfortunately, is not illegal. Emotional abuse is not illegal. It doesn't make it okay. And in general, if you talk to people in the field, ask questions, do like search Reddit and all that, right? If there's smoke, there's probably some fire. Yeah, and we would generally be a bit more careful about engaging with like groups which maybe attract not great stories.
Which is also why eventually I started to realize why cults still exist in the world. Right? Because we watch a lot of Netflix documentaries about cults and everything. Right now, I often wondered, why are these cults? And because a lot of times the documentary always ends off saying that, the cult still exists in this place and they're still recruiting people and stuff. Yeah, I often wondered, why can't they just shut down the cult? Right? And because there's so much bad press about it already. And then eventually, after a while in these institutions, I realized that it's really because what they're doing is just not illegal, right? Because these people that are so-called being in the cult, they want to be there, they choose to be there, and they think that it's for the betterment of themselves, right? Even though the cult may not have their best interests at heart, right? Which is kind of sad, but I don't really have a solution of how to tackle this other than just being very loud about telling people to stay away from the organization. Yeah.
As much as I do understand the idea of having a subjective perception, that means how we view, basically how I view my mental health and how you view your mental health is very different. We are all unique in that sense. As much as I understand that, but I think at some point we have to also understand there must be certain objectivity behind it. So, for instance, how would I know I've gotten better? Let's say I were to see a psychologist, right? It can't be just because I feel better. It shouldn't be just that. It shouldn't just be a matter of feeling. It should have some signs, some measurements, something for us to know that, hey, we are actually getting better, whether is it by paper, by whatever scans, whatever assessments. I'm trying to advocate this bit as well, whereby there must be a certain objectivity behind our subjective perception. If let's say we're looking at mental health, the reason why potentially cult or any difficult or any of those practices are still there is because they sell you hope that you just feel better. So by attending this more of this thing, attending our session, whatnot like that, you just feel better. But when you don't have an objective measurement to it of why will I actually gotten better, like so you will just stick there because that's where they are selling you. And of course, if at any point whereby I need help, the main thing that I'm looking out for is hope that I want to feel better. So these people are selling these ideas that I will make you good, I will improve you, you will be the better person than whatever there is. And I think, and of course, it's not illegal to sell hope to people. Like I can't ban you from selling hope. I mean, generally we all sell hope. Any organizations do that. But I think once we understand why we are seeking help from help seekers' point of view, why do we seek help? How do we know we are getting better? What helped us to know that we are improving? I think once we are able to figure that bit out, we might have more autonomy to not fall into any of those random traps out there. But I think, again, I wouldn't want to put all the responsibilities onto help seekers. It's never just that. I like to also think that whether is it clinicians or community organizations out there have their roles to play. But I think we have to have enough information out there for the help seekers to understand that they do have the role to play in seeking help as well. So let's work together. Hopefully that will help us to prevent more people from falling into, like a better word, cult out there.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. If I can bring it together and we'll start to put in a close. For if you're listening out there, and you are a help seeker, it's not a bad thing that you are going with the vulnerability of I am looking for hope, I am looking for community, I am looking to be well, right? And those are the things that make you vulnerable. And it's just about making sure that you don't get sucked into a thing that you didn't sign up for, right? Nobody joins a bad thing. They join a good thing that can turn bad. And if that's what's happened, you can always say no, reject it. And if anything smells a little bit culty, it's probably better to err on the side of caution and it might be. If you're a listener, I want you to know that there are a lot of ethical, good practitioners out there who care about giving help seekers the best kind of help. And would strongly encourage you to not give up if you've been burnt once. Seek help from people who are safe for you. Yeah. So, Sherman, Ivan, thank you for this very rich conversation. As a closing ritual, we just invite our guests to sort of fill in the blanks. So you can just go with the first thing that comes off your mind. For you both, what does it mean to be whole?
I think to be whole is to be able to love and to be loved and really to feel a sense of belonging in wherever you are, right? And also really to be able to live your authentic self. Yeah.
Being whole is to live my life, whether or not with mistakes, whether or not with success, doesn't really matter because every single of these opportunities, experience out there helped me to grow as a person. But I think it's just about living. Like to be whole is to live.
And I'm going to change up our closing questions since the theme has been a lot about seeking help safely in community, could you both share what is a community that for you has been safe for you, that you feel grateful for, that you've grown in?
Of course, my immediate families would definitely be the main people, even though they still, even especially my grandma, even until now, she still doesn't know what I'm doing exactly. But I think it's a concept whereby she's just there. And you can see how proud she is, although she doesn't understand a bit of what I was saying. Second bit would actually be people of the same mindset as I do. I am very expressive on LinkedIn. So there are a lot of clinicians out there. There are a lot of ethical practitioners out there that really share and resonate with my call. I mean, all of the expressions that I have there, whether or not it's about asking for ethical, pushing for ethical practices, pushing for ethical guidelines, so on and so forth. So that at least at that moment of time, even though there potentially are a lot of people who go against with what I shared, but it reminds me that I'm not alone in this battle. And I like to also link back to help seeking as well. Sometimes it may seem like we are alone, but if we were to just take a step back, sometimes we are really not alone. It's just that we are too close to the matter. So if we can take a step back, it helps to see that there are people around us for us.
Thank you, Ivan. Sherman, how about for you?
I think the first community that came to mind is really people within the social impact space. Yeah, I think these are people that like we can relate to one another about the joys and also the horrors of being in this space. They will make me feel that I'm not alone in this journey, because we do go through difficult times and challenging moments as well. Yeah, and these are people that I relate to very well.
Thank you very much, Ivan and Sherman. And I want to extend like just a gratitude that I have that there are practitioners out there like you who care about doing it well, doing it better, and not being afraid to put your voice out there so that people can be more aware of what's going on and what might be better for them. Yeah. And better for each other. So thank you very much for doing what you do. Yeah.
And thank you for having us here.
Of course.
Thank you. I mean, it's great to learn from the both of you, actually.
So thank you very much to whoever's been listening out there. I really hope that you will use whatever you've learned from this to seek help from safe places and safe people. Yeah. So thank you very much for listening.